By late July 2026, the United States and Iran are openly exchanging military strikes. American aircraft are hitting Iranian military facilities, while Iran is launching missiles and drones at American bases and ships across the Middle East. The conflict has also spread beyond the two countries. Iran-aligned armed groups are operating from Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen. Oil tankers are being attacked around the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important shipping routes. And neighboring countries are being pulled deeper into the fighting. At first glance, this hostility may look inevitable. Iranian leaders regularly describe the United States as the Great Satan, while American governments have treated Iran as one of their most persistent enemies. But Iran and America were not always enemies. For much of the 20th century, Iran was one of America's closest partners in the Middle East. The United States sold Iran advanced weapons, trained its military, supported its ruler, and viewed the country as a critical barrier against Soviet expansion. So how did these two countries go from strategic partners to open warfare? The answer does not begin with Iran's nuclear program, Israel, or even the Islamic Revolution. It begins with oil, colonial influence, and a coup in 1953. Iran, historically known as Persia, sits between the Middle East, Central Asia, and South Asia. It also controls the northern side of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, through which a substantial share of the world's oil and gas travels. That geography has always made Iran strategically important. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, Britain and Russia competed heavily for influence inside Iran. Britain became particularly interested in Iranian oil after a vast petroleum reserve was discovered there in the early 1900s. A British-controlled company, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, developed much of Iran's oil industry. This company later became British Petroleum, now known simply as BP. Iran technically owned the oil beneath its territory, but the British company controlled most of the production, refining, and international sale. Many Iranians believed Britain was taking enormous profits while Iran received an unfair share. In 1951, Iran's parliament backed Mohammad Mossadegh as prime minister. Mossadegh was a nationalist. In this context, nationalism meant that he wanted Iran to control its own resources and remain independent from foreign powers. His government nationalized the Iranian oil industry. Nationalization means transferring a privately or foreign-controlled industry into state ownership. Iran took control of the assets operated by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, arguing that Iranian oil should primarily benefit the Iranian population. Britain responded with an international boycott intended to prevent Iran from selling its oil. It also began encouraging the United States to help remove Mossadegh. Initially, the American government was reluctant, but the Cold War was intensifying. American officials feared that Iran's economic crisis and political instability could strengthen the Iranian communist movement, known as the Tudeh Party. Iran shared a long border with the Soviet Union, so Washington considered the possibility of Soviet influence particularly dangerous. Oil and Cold War fears therefore became mixed together. In 1953, the American CIA and Britain's intelligence service MI6 supported an operation to remove Mossadegh. The operation used propaganda, political pressure, paid organizers, and Iranian military officers to destabilize his government. After an initial attempt failed, Mossadegh was overthrown in August 1953. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was restored as Iran's dominant ruler. A Shah is essentially a Persian king or emperor. American records later openly acknowledged the United States' role in helping remove Mossadegh and restore the Shah's power. This coup became one of the most important events in modern Iranian history. From the American perspective at the time, it appeared successful. Iran remained outside Soviet control, oil production eventually resumed, and a friendly ruler remained in power. But many Iranians drew a very different lesson. They saw a foreign power overthrowing an Iranian government after it attempted to control the country's own natural resources. The coup did not immediately turn Iran into America's enemy. In fact, it began the closest period of cooperation between the two countries. For the next 25 years, the United States treated the Shah as one of its most important allies in the Middle East. Iran purchased large quantities of American weapons, including some of the most advanced aircraft available. American military advisors worked inside the country, and thousands of Iranian students studied in the United States. The Shah wanted Iran to become a powerful modern state. He expanded education, developed industries, redistributed some agricultural land, and gave women greater legal and political rights. But political power remained concentrated around the monarchy. Opposition parties were restricted, elections were tightly controlled, and critics were imprisoned. The Shah's intelligence and security organization, known as SAVAK, became infamous for surveillance, detention, and torture. Washington continued supporting the Shah because he was anti-communist, protected Western access to oil, and acted as a regional partner against Soviet influence. During the Nixon administration, Iran was described within the American government as one of the United States' staunchest friends in the region. To many ordinary Iranians, however, the Shah increasingly appeared to be protected by the United States. That meant anger toward the monarchy gradually became connected with anger toward America. This opposition brought together several very different groups. There were liberals who wanted democratic government, left-wing movements that opposed capitalism and Western influence, students frustrated by repression, workers facing economic problems, and religious conservatives who believed the Shah was weakening Iran's Islamic identity. The most influential religious opponent was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. An Ayatollah is a senior religious scholar in Shia Islam. Shia Islam is the branch of Islam followed by most Iranians. Khomeini accused the Shah of serving American interests and allowing foreign culture to dominate Iran. The government forced him into exile, but recordings of his speeches were copied and secretly circulated inside the country. By 1978, protests against the Shah had grown into a national uprising. Strikes disrupted the economy. Demonstrations spread across major cities, and the security forces could no longer restore control without causing even greater resistance. In January 1979, the Shah left Iran. Khomeini returned from exile shortly afterward, welcomed by enormous crowds. The monarchy collapsed and was replaced by the Islamic Republic of Iran. An Islamic republic combines elected institutions with religious authority. Iran elects a president and parliament, but its supreme leader and religious bodies hold greater power over the state, military, and judiciary. The revolution completely changed Iran's foreign policy. The United States had supported the Shah, trained his forces, and helped him remain in power. The new revolutionary government therefore viewed American influence as a threat to Iran's independence and to the survival of the revolution itself. Relations deteriorated even further when the deposed Shah became seriously ill, and the United States allowed him to enter the country for medical treatment. Many Iranians suspected that America might be preparing another operation like the 1953 coup. On November 4, 1979, Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran. They captured American diplomats and employees and demanded that the Shah be returned to Iran. More than 50 Americans were held hostage. 52 of them remained in captivity for 444 days. The United States froze Iranian assets, imposed economic pressure, and attempted a military rescue operation. That operation failed when American aircraft collided in the Iranian desert, killing 8 U.S. service members. The hostages were finally released in January 1981, minutes after Ronald Reagan became president. The crisis dominated American television for more than a year. For many Americans, Iran was no longer merely a foreign country experiencing a revolution. It had become the country that publicly humiliated the United States and imprisoned its diplomats. The United States severed formal diplomatic relations with Iran in 1980. The two countries have not maintained normal embassies in each other's capitals since then, but their hostility soon moved beyond diplomacy. In September 1980, Iraq invaded Iran. Iraq was then ruled by Saddam Hussein. He believed revolutionary Iran was weak and hoped to seize disputed territory, strengthen Iraq's control over regional waterways, and prevent Iran's revolution from inspiring Iraq's own Shia population. The invasion began the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted nearly 8 years and killed hundreds of thousands of people. The United States officially declared neutrality. But as Iran recovered and began advancing into Iraqi territory, Washington increasingly supported Iraq. American assistance to Baghdad eventually included intelligence, commercial support, diplomatic protection, and military cooperation. This continued even though the United States knew that Iraq had used chemical weapons during the conflict. Chemical weapons use poisonous substances to injure or kill people. Iraqi forces used mustard gas and nerve agents against Iranian soldiers and Kurdish civilians. For Iran, this created another lasting grievance. Iranians remembered that Iraq had invaded their country, used chemical weapons, and received support from several foreign powers, including the United States. The relationship became even more complicated because Washington was secretly dealing with Iran at the same time. During the Iran-Contra affair, members of the Reagan administration secretly facilitated weapons sales to Iran, partly in an effort to secure the release of American hostages held by groups in Lebanon. Money from those sales was then redirected to support anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua, despite restrictions imposed by the U.S. Congress. So America was quietly selling some weapons to Iran while publicly leaning toward Iraq. Foreign policy, having apparently become bored with ordinary hypocrisy, had decided to attempt competitive hypocrisy. By the late 1980s, American and Iranian forces were also fighting directly in the Persian Gulf. Both Iran and Iraq attacked oil shipping during what became known as the Tanker War. The United States sent naval forces to protect shipping and escort tankers through the region. In 1988, American forces launched Operation Praying Mantis, destroying Iranian ships and attacking offshore military facilities after an American warship struck an Iranian mine. Then, on July 3, 1988, the American cruiser USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655. The civilian passenger aircraft was traveling from Bandar Abbas to Dubai. The American crew misidentified it as an attacking Iranian military aircraft and launched 2 missiles. All 290 people aboard were killed, including 66 children. The United States described the incident as a tragic mistake and later paid compensation, but it did not formally accept legal responsibility. Inside Iran, many people found it difficult to believe that the world's most powerful military could accidentally destroy a civilian airliner flying on its scheduled route. By the end of the 1980s, each country had constructed a powerful story about the other. America saw Iran as a government that had taken hostages, supported armed groups, and threatened shipping. Iran saw America as the country that had organized the 1953 coup, supported the Shah, backed Iraq, and shot down an Iranian passenger aircraft. These were not simply disagreements over policy, they became part of each country's national memory. During the 1990s, the conflict expanded across the Middle East. Iran supported Hezbollah, a Lebanese Shia political and armed movement created during Israel's invasion of Lebanon in the early 1980s. Iran provided it with funding, weapons, and training. Iran later developed relationships with Palestinian armed groups, including Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Hamas is a Sunni Islamist Palestinian organization, meaning that it follows a different branch of Islam from Iran's Shia leadership. But both opposed Israel, allowing political interests to overcome their religious differences. This support became part of what Iran calls the Axis of Resistance, a loose network of governments and armed groups opposed to Israel, American military influence, and several US-backed governments in the region. A proxy is an armed group supported by a stronger country to pursue shared goals. The word can be misleading because these groups have their own leaders and local interests, but Iranian money, weapons, and training have greatly expanded their capabilities. Iran had not always been Israel's enemy. Under the Shah, Iran and Israel maintained quiet, strategic, and economic relations. Both countries were non-Arab states surrounded by governments they considered potentially hostile. After the Islamic Revolution, Iran cut relations with Israel, recognized the Palestinian cause as central to its revolutionary ideology, and handed the former Israeli embassy in Tehran to the Palestine Liberation Organization. This is why Palestine became connected to the Iran-America conflict. The United States became Israel's most important international supporter. Iran built and supported groups dedicated to fighting Israel. Every major confrontation involving Israel, Hezbollah, Hamas, or Palestinian Islamic Jihad therefore carried the risk of drawing Iran and America closer to conflict. The next major source of hostility was Iran's nuclear program. A nuclear program does not automatically mean a nuclear weapons program. Uranium can be used as fuel in civilian nuclear reactors, but uranium must first be enriched. Natural uranium contains only a small proportion of the isotope needed for most nuclear reactions. Enrichment increases that proportion. Lower levels can be used for civilian power, while much higher levels can potentially be used in a nuclear weapon. Iran says its program has peaceful purposes. The United States, Israel, and several other countries have feared that Iran could develop the technical ability to produce a bomb, even if it had not yet decided to build one. The dispute intensified after previously undeclared Iranian nuclear facilities became publicly known in 2002. International sanctions followed. Sanctions are restrictions intended to pressure a government economically. They may block banking transactions, oil sales, imports, investment, or access to foreign assets. Sanctions damaged Iran's economy, but did not eliminate its nuclear program. In 2015, Iran and 6 major world powers reached the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, usually called the Iran Nuclear Deal. Iran agreed to restrict uranium enrichment, reduce its nuclear stockpile, and accept expanded international inspections. In return, nuclear-related sanctions were lifted or suspended. The agreement did not resolve every dispute. It did not permanently eliminate Iran's enrichment capability. It also did not cover Iran's ballistic missiles, domestic repression, or support for armed groups. Supporters argued that it placed verifiable limits on Iran's nuclear activity and bought time. Critics, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, and many American Republicans, argued that it gave Iran sanctions relief, while allowing key restrictions to expire later. In 2018, President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the agreement and restored sanctions under a policy called maximum pressure. The Trump administration argued that stronger economic pressure would force Iran to accept broader and more permanent restrictions. Instead, Iran gradually exceeded the nuclear limits established by the deal and expanded its enrichment program. The two sides had recreated a familiar pattern. America believed pressure would force Iran to retreat. Iran believed retreating under pressure would only encourage America to demand more. The result was greater pressure, greater resistance, and less trust. In January 2020, the United States killed Qasem Soleimani in a drone strike near Baghdad airport. Soleimani commanded the Quds Force, the branch of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps responsible for foreign military operations. The Revolutionary Guard, usually shortened to IRGC, is an elite Iranian military organization created after the 1979 revolution. It operates alongside Iran's regular armed forces and has major influence over missiles, regional armed groups, intelligence, and parts of the Iranian economy. To Americans, Soleimani had organized militias responsible for killing American troops and destabilizing governments across the Middle East. To many Iranians and Iran's allies, he was the commander who had defended the region against ISIS and expanded Iran's influence. Iran retaliated by launching missiles at American bases in Iraq, injuring U.S. personnel. The countries avoided full-scale war, but direct military confrontation was no longer theoretical. The American invasion of Iraq in 2003 had also unintentionally strengthened Iran. Saddam Hussein had been one of Iran's greatest enemies. When the United States removed him, political parties and armed groups with long-standing connections to Iran gained influence inside Iraq. Some Iran-backed Iraqi militias later attacked American forces. By 2026, these groups had become a central part of Iran's regional network, with tens of thousands of fighters and significant political influence. The war in Gaza after the Hamas-led attack on Israel in October 2023 further intensified this system of confrontation. The United States provided Israel with military and diplomatic support. Hezbollah attacked Israel from Lebanon. The Houthis attacked shipping around the Red Sea, and Iraqi armed groups targeted American bases. Iran supported these organizations, though each group made its own decisions and pursued its own local interests. What had once been a conflict managed through sanctions, covert operations, and proxies gradually became more direct. In 2026, the United States and Israel launched strikes against Iran. Iran responded against Israel, American military positions, and countries hosting U.S. forces. By July, the conflict had expanded through Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, the Persian Gulf, and neighboring Arab states. American and Iranian forces were no longer merely threatening one another or fighting through intermediaries. They were exchanging attacks openly. So how did Iran and America become enemies? There was no single cause. The 1953 coup convinced generations of Iranians that the United States would interfere in their country to protect its strategic and economic interests. American support for the Shah connected the United States with an increasingly authoritarian monarchy. The Islamic Revolution transformed anti-Americanism into an official ideology. The hostage crisis turned Iran into a symbol of humiliation and danger for millions of Americans. The Iran-Iraq War, the shooting down of Flight 655, regional armed groups, sanctions, the nuclear dispute, and repeated military attacks then reinforced the belief on each side that the other could not be trusted. The conflict is also not simply a misunderstanding. Iran's government has supported armed organizations that have killed Americans and attacked American allies. It has threatened Israel, restricted political freedom at home, and used regional militias to expand its influence. The United States has overthrown an Iranian government, supported an authoritarian ruler, backed Iran's enemy during a devastating war, imposed broad economic sanctions, and repeatedly used military force around Iran's borders. Both countries can point to genuine acts of aggression by the other. Both can also remove the inconvenient parts of their own history and present themselves as the innocent party responding to an irrational enemy. That is what makes the relationship so difficult to repair. Every new negotiation carries the memory of an earlier betrayal. Every military action is justified as retaliation for something that happened before it. The United States remembers the embassy hostages. Iran remembers the 1953 coup. America remembers attacks by Iran-backed militias. Iran remembers Saddam Hussein, sanctions, and Flight 655. And now both countries have a new generation of missile strikes and wartime deaths to add to the list. Iran and America did not become enemies overnight. They became enemies through more than 70 years of intervention, revolution, fear, retaliation, and failed attempts to force the other side to surrender. The current war may have begun in 2026, but the relationship that produced it was built one grievance at a time.